Thanks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this EPC Connecting Europe Policy Dialogue about communicating the crisis and recovery. We've all had to adapt our means of consuming information over the last 6 months, and it's clear that there have been some pretty big changes in how information is being produced as well, with working from home, social distancing, and Zoom calls like this one becoming the new default for us all. Now, the crisis that we've been facing over the last few months has itself required a slightly new approach to communication. It needs communication that has been on point, accurate and catchy enough to cut through the noise and make itself heard among all of the different communicators. It needs to cover everything from the latest social distancing guidelines through to travel restrictions, what to do if you get sick, and accurate health advice as well, in an environment where sometimes conspiracy theories have been widespread. And of course, it needs to communicate the support that's available to those who are in need. Now, I don't want to say that we are out of the woods yet. It seems that this situation may continue for a while longer, but as the immediate healthcare emergency recedes somewhat, another angle has come up, and that is how the crisis has already caused significant economic disruption, and it looks like its impact is going to be felt for a very long time to come. So now that the conversation is, if not moving on exactly, at least taking on a new dimension, that of recovery, it's very important that we have this discussion today to hear what is being done to communicate not just the crisis over the last few months, but the recovery in the months to come as well. Now, a survey that was recently done for the European Parliament found that although 3/4 of Europeans have heard messages or seen messages about actions that the EU has taken to respond to the coronavirus pandemic, 41% of them don't know what these actions are. So in other words, Europeans generally know that the EU is playing a role here, but they don't know the details. Well, to give us the details, we have with us today Pia Ahrenkilde Hansen, the Director General for Communication at the European Commission. And I'd like to give her the floor now to explain how the Commission has approached the task and what the next steps look like. Pia, thank you very much for being here today. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking very much forward to also get wiser on the theme that we're going to discuss today about communicating in an unprecedented health crisis such as the one we have indeed experienced, and that has had both, of course, at the local, regional, national and European level, huge ramifications. And also, of course, we have a lot of lessons to draw from this, and we have learned a lot from this crisis. So this is perhaps the first thing I want to say. We have learned an immense amount of what it takes to communicate in a crisis such as the one we have been through, and that we are still, as you were saying, not out of yet, but we are differently equipped, I would say, today from when the crisis started, also in communication terms. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to discuss with you where we come from communication-wise. After having been through this first phase, I will come into this phased approach that I think has relevance when we discuss this in a minute, and also where we're going next when it comes to charting out. And I'm speaking about communication now because policy and communication go together. So of course I will talk about recovery, because recovery, I think is where the focus is, as we are of course still addressing the health crisis, as we still have a new period to go into where we are going to build resilience and hopefully be better equipped than we were at the outset of the crisis, while designing and finalizing these instruments that will also help us lastingly and to recover from the crisis. Communication-wise, indeed, the big crisis, the unprecedented crisis, can best be understood if you consider that it's a three-phased approach, so to speak, where we are, after having been in the very reactive phase of responding immediately to the crisis, also in communication terms, we are in a kind of phase 2 where we have been since the summer. I will explain what I mean with this. When we first were facing this unprecedented health crisis, we were in what you could call full crisis communication mode, with all that entails in terms of centralizing messaging, trying to be unified and very fast responding to the crisis, with a rather top-down approach, you could say, full mobilization of our services. But of course, setting the tone for all of this was our president, because President von der Leyen, early on, I think the 2nd of March was the kind of official date where she established her crisis response, her commissioners team, and everything kind of was following from that, because she also set the tone not only for the policy response, but also for the communication. And we mirrored that in the Commission very quickly by creating not only the website that the president asked us to set up, so make sure that everybody was on the same page in terms of what not only the Commission, but the EU as a whole was doing, but also when it came to the way that we were working internally in the Commission, because we found quite quickly that information otherwise could be too uneven, and that it was difficult to stay on the same page, which was so important to, let's say, make the action understandable, inform about the action that the Commission was taking, and also make it visible. No small challenge, because we all remember that it didn't come out of nothing, the coordination of member states. There was it was quite difficult in the beginning to get member states to work together. Fortunately, that very quickly changed. People realized that we all had this interest in working together to actually respond, and that going it alone was simply not an option, that if one member state was taking measures to prevent equipment from reaching where it was needed, well, that was obviously counterproductive and very quickly led to an unsustainable situation, just to take that as an example. So everything followed from the political situation, from the crisis response team of the president, and then trickled through the organization, of course, also with our political communication that you know well, through our spokesperson service, also leading the way, and also enabling, crucially, media, even in this situation, and in the situation where we actually had to very quickly also create a virtual press room, were able to follow the action that we were taking. Internally, in addition to this whole task force approach that we mirrored also at the communication level, we and then with the website as a kind of hub for what we were doing. Of course, you know, this website is always in itself a static thing. So what was really important was communicating, linking, generating social media traffic around it. But it definitely created a kind of reference point that where everybody could see, you know, in the way we were able to do it at the time, as we were learning, you know, how to feed it properly, what we were doing and what the EU was doing. But telling the story is one thing, informing about each and every of the, I think the list is about 800 something actions that we have taken since the beginning of the crisis, and there you can mix everything from, you know, authorizing state aid and all these crucial help packages that member states of course were putting together to assist also economically on the ground and alleviate the impacts, to all the different solidarity actions that we took. But all these many actions, it was one thing to talk about them, inform about them, take questions about them from the media, and, you know, see it replicated in media reports, audiovisually and in the newspapers. But in a crisis, it also is very important, of course, to show what is going on. So not only tell, but to show. So the images of solidarity, from repatriation flights to boxes, supplies, planes, etc., going around Europe was very important. Again, not so obvious as it sounds, because of course, I mean, the warehouses are not in Brussels, you know, they are out there on the ground, and the borders were often closed. So it was also about keeping the borders open for essential business so that consumers could actually continue to receive essential goods, etc. So showing that equally was something that was also very important, and something that, let's say, people in the beginning of the crisis definitely didn't perceive, and where all focus was, let's say, on national governments, of course, telling their story about what they were doing to respond immediately on the ground, and not necessarily, at least the televisions and press conferences that I was watching, not necessarily bending in to their own narrative what part Europe had in this. So there was a little bit of a deficit there, a gap, an information gap, a communication gap to fill. The first phases, I would say, concentrated very much on that kind of thing. Now, as we went into the summer, we could reclaim a bit more of the momentum, I would say, because we got more in control of our communication effort. And of course, the policy response also changed, because as we had been into this very reactive step-by-step approach that was very focused on the health crisis and its consequences, its immediate economic and social consequences, it became about designing the way ahead, chart the way out of the crisis. First, immediately with exit measures, so that we didn't keep lockdowns longer than necessary, and that we are actually able to coordinate between the member states, so that we didn't have one country closed, another open on the basis of different criteria, but actually some commonality and coordination was achieved. And then, of course, designing very crucially this, I mean, I use the word historical, it's a cliche, but I think most people agree that it is a historical package when it comes to its scale and unprecedented character, combining our multi-annual financial framework with an additional instrument giving Europe firepower to face the crisis, but not only to face the crisis and chart the way out of it, but actually at the same time chart the way towards these transformation processes, the green and digital ones that have been, let's say, part of our hymn sheet from the beginning of this commission. So that's where we are now. And so there's enough to do, of course, while at the same time, of course, a lot of other things are requiring our attention, from migration to rule of law and, you know, the environment around Europe, the geopolitical environment. And I haven't even talked about the global part of the response, but I think it's important to underline it, because it was also absolutely essential to make visible how Europe was acting, not only towards our own interests, but also to ensure, for example, through the pledging conference that our president organized and that many partners took part in, that the response to the health crisis is one that we want to be accessible not only to all people in Europe, but also worldwide. So that was also, I think, something that moved the visibility and created perhaps the perception that you were talking about from the opinion polls, in terms of people perceiving, the many people who have perceived that Europe has been acting, even if they are quite unclear about what exactly we have been doing. But I think the global response definitely moved the visibility of that response upwards. The next phase, to be brief, will see us moving forward and out of the crisis eventually. It will not happen like this, obviously. You mentioned the huge economic impact that this crisis is having. And we have a lot of to see coming yet in this particular respect, even if member states and the European Union, for example, with instruments such as the SURE instrument, let's say, enabling member states who need it to also get support for their short-term employment schemes, and all the other economic measures that we have taken to basically support in the short term alleviate in the short term the economic impact, reprogramming funding, and also providing, let's say, means to stabilize the economies. And now it's about charting the way forward, of course, while the negotiations are still ongoing with the European Parliament on this huge package on which European leaders reached agreement at the end of July. We also need to see how are we going to go about it in orchestrating our part of the communication to tell that story about what Europe is doing to enable people in Europe to recover, get out of the crisis, to help businesses the right way forward, to support that digital and green transformation that we strongly feel that Europe needs and that will benefit everyone, indeed leaving no one behind, as we are saying in the narrative. So this is, in short, a little bit the three-phased approach that we have been into. You have seen the President's State of the Union recently showing what this new future may look like and what the key ideas for our President are, what her strong ideas are to face these challenges, also with the different projects being rolled out in the days after the speech. A speech that I think was, I will be brief and close my intervention because I know we're short on time, but I think it was overall well received in terms of its ideas. It's clear that the green climate theme was the one that trended in most countries, but the speech overall was very visible. That also is something that we worked on for quite some time to get the ideas, the messages of the speech across. I can get into in detail which ones resonated most and where and why we think this was the case. But I think that the fact that the President charted the way from what she termed fragility into vitality, I think these things, this impassioned speech resonated quite strongly with people who are ready, as the President also said, for change and ready to move on. And the spirit that should drive this next generation EU period, where we do change by design, as the President also said, not by disaster or dictate. The whole spirit was something that really resonated quite well. In conclusion, going forward, what we will do, building on the President's State of the Union speech from the 16th of September, will be to continue to explain the recovery effort and how Europe is working to protect lives, indeed in a situation where the pandemic is far from over, how we are, as an European Union, lending stability through the instruments I have described, and then more than anything, I think, showing how the European Union also helps creating opportunity for people through the recovery umbrella I have described very briefly, the green and digital priorities. So let me stop there, and I'm looking very much forward to discussing.
Thank you very much, Pia. I think you're absolutely right that historical and unprecedented and the like are not cliches in this instance. They're very apt. I think they're very apt for the scale of the crisis as well as for the scale of the response. And just very quickly before we move on to the panel, I wanted to raise one thing that you mentioned about the setting the tone of the debate. Now, the crisis that we've been facing here has been one that's not just about the communication response for the recovery is not just about the amount of money that is being distributed or even the number of actions or anything like this. you also need to be able to communicate to people that things are under control, right? There is an emotional element to it as well, because this is a crisis that is striking right to the heart of people's health and well-being, and brings with it a lot of fears and anxieties. How has the communication approach been able to bring in the emotional aspect and reassure people that things are under control?
You're absolutely right about emotion. It's a point that we indeed have worked a lot with in the past few years, after maybe a long period where emotional communication was not so much part of our approach, but it certainly is now. And in this crisis, it's absolutely indispensable, because, as you say, and point to, it's a visceral experience to be in a health crisis. It has been traumatic for many, and it does require an empathetic and emotional approach, which I think you have seen also embodied in a lot of our president's communication. And she's very talented communicator, but also very capable of expressing from the earliest moments onwards, when, for example, she, I think it was in April, acknowledged very strongly the shortcomings of Europe in the initial response to the crisis, right? I think that was a strong emotional moment, one of many. And I think you also saw it now recently in the State of the Union speech, when also acknowledging this initial fragility that has been exposed, and not only Europe has been exposed as fragile, the world has been exposed as fragile. She's been very clear and open about that in the opening of the State of the Union speech, right? And that was actually seen not as a weakness, but as a strength. In many cases, to be able to acknowledge that and to work with that. Other examples include, for example, also her use of the example of the two Italian tennis players on the roof, the girls who played tennis on the Italian rooftops. The refugee in Dublin who successfully became a medical doctor, I think, and you know, many other ways of embodying and basically capturing the emotion around the crisis, and by the way, also showing not only in our own communication, but also allowing through testimonials in our communication, for example, around the 9th of May, where we used a lot of stories also to show how people had stepped up, you know, and faced the crisis in solidarity locally, etc. All of that, and we've seen so many examples of it also outside, you know, any institutional communication, how much emotion and how much people have shared emotion throughout this crisis as a way of coping with it. I think it has helped. We also saw it when we had the global response, and we had this very good cooperation with Global Citizen. We used music. I mean, that was their setup, and indeed it was a very positive one. But also there, you know, we had artists that showed their emotion in different ways, and all the participants around the global response had, you know, their own stories from the crisis, also reflecting a lot of it, emotion. So more than money, you said, bringing people together. I think that's very strongly what emotion also is about. So I think, if anything, this crisis has also taught us that we shouldn't be afraid of showing how we feel and showing difficulty or acknowledging it, because this is the way that we can learn and move on stronger.
Thank you very much, Pia. I would like to now move on to the panel, and because the subject of the member state contribution came up a couple of times in Pia's contribution, I'd like to start with Irene Plank, who's the Director for Strategic Communication at the German Federal Foreign Office. Now, as Pia mentioned, there were occasionally times towards the start of the crisis when the member states were really taking the most prominent role in communicating. And sometimes it might have seemed a little bit uncoordinated, or each member state was sort of doing its own message. And as things developed, things became a little bit more streamlined. Irene, could you walk us through a little bit of what Germany's experience of communicating the crisis was initially? And then maybe swap hats and take off your German member state hat and put on the German presidency hat and tell us about how the German presidency of the Council of the EU responded to this as well.
All right.
Please,
okay, maybe just I agree basically with everything that Pia just said, and we're very proud of the Commission's work in communication. Germany as a EU member state, our first experiences, I think they were basically very similar to other states' experiences. At first there were these reflexes of falling back on nationally available structures and possibilities to act. And I think Germany is a federal state. We are not very centralized, and many important health-related issues, but also concerning schools and hospitals, etc., are not managed by Berlin, but by the Länder. So that was probably in a way a similar experience that it became clear very quickly that we needed coordination, not only in action, but also in communicating about those actions. So that was a learning step that took place within Germany, and also this shutting down borders and becoming all national, and that was something that was in Germany. Sometimes it happened like a reflex happens, but it was very quickly criticized very openly in basically all political discussions we had, as you may have witnessed. And I think switching my hat to EU member state who has the presidency, I think there's two things. Our presidency agenda, of course, was completely reshaped by the corona. So staying agile, staying flexible, I think has been the overarching theme for all of us. So also this presidency term has taken on quite a different shape from the original planning maybe a year ago. And I think now boosting the economic and social recuperation of the EU, of all the EU member states, is the top priority. Doing that in a green and digital way, of course. And I think in matters of communication, our leitmotif, if I may use that term, our leitmotif is that we need to keep working at coordinated and solidaric responses, not only being solidaric in our actions, but also coordinating our communication. And actually, in preparation for our meeting today, I checked up our EU presidency website, and I found in the presidency calendar, I found, let me look, 28 events listed there, which have to do with coordinating health issues. And among those issues is, for example, the issue of a joint app, this Corona Watch apps that many member states have now nationally, but we would like to have one that's working all over Europe, all over the European Union. So that's one thing. Of course, we do need to be coordinated in our border management. We do need, and we do need to be coordinated in our recovery plans. So I won't repeat what Pia said about that. I fully subscribe to that. So to sum up in a way, our experience as a member state has helped us within Germany, with the 16 Länder to coordinate, has helped us to be a better EU member state in this context. And we think acting in coordination is of course paramount, but we also need to coordinate our communication. And I think we are on a pretty good way to do that. Just as preliminary remarks.
I suppose the experience that you referred to of a federal state being able to bring that experience to the European level, this maybe has some lessons for the kind of medium that you use to get the message out, right? Because a lot of the things that people needed to know immediately at the height of the crisis were quite local concerns. You need to know where you can get masks, where you can get tests done, what you have to do if you're feeling symptoms and so on. And then, of course, there's the national coordination where you need national rules.
What's happening?
There's also a European level.
Yeah.
So did you find that there were particular lessons that came out about what is best communicated at what level? Like what is best suited for the local, a local council, for example, to communicate, and what is best done at the federal level within Germany? And do you have any insights about how that might translate to the European level, particularly when we're thinking about recovery?
Well, actually, I think communication is very closely tied to the actual responsibility. So if it's, for example, a Länder issue in Germany, how exactly to deal with the problem of schools, distancing rules in schools, are they open, are they closed, when are they going to shut down? Of course, you need to communicate that on the level of the Länder, but obviously for citizens to feel that their government on all its levels actually knows what it's doing, you also need to have a federal communication about all of this, which has to include in that case to explain why it may be different in one federal state from another federal state. We have federal states with extremely low corona numbers, and of course they don't need to be as strict as, for example, the city of Berlin needs to be. So you need both. You need local communication on what's happening locally, but you also need to have the overarching thing to actually explain why that may differ and why it still makes sense.
It sounds like the principle of subsidiarity can apply here if we translate things into EU terms. So, thank you very much.
Oh, Paul,
please.
if I may actually, sorry, that's really only 1 minute, because while there was still no mention of Corona, we planned things to happen during our presidency, which were supposed to be fun and cultural and communicative. So there's a game which is called Pathways. There's other games really for the computer gaming community. And there is an artwork which is called the Earth Speaker, which allows children actually to pool their messages and do some augmented reality things with them. And it's very beautiful and it's very cute. And it gets kids to talk about their visions of the future. So it's extremely political too. All of this was electronic. So when Corona finally hit, this turned out to be such a great benefit that we hadn't planned this to be actual events, but we had planned this for the digital sphere all along. So really a mix of good luck and planning, mostly good luck. But we have super responses. So what I want to highlight here is that Europe as a cultural sphere, talking about cultural things, not only about masks, doctors, supplies, borders, but really who we are as Europeans and what we do, how do we communicate together, what do we do together, what are our shared ideas and values. That has been extremely successful, and that's just one thing I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important point. Yes, I mean, the whole discussion of crisis and recovery doesn't need to be put entirely in negative terms, does it? There's a positive spin on what it has taught us about who we are and how we work together. Well, talking of how we work together, I'd like to stay in Berlin for a moment and turn to Jana Puglierin, who is the head of the Berlin office and Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Jana, thank you for joining us today. We've heard a little bit about solidarity today, solidarity between the EU and between member states. We also have some hard data on this in the form of ECFR's project, the Solidarity Tracker. Could you tell us a little bit about this project and what were the main findings of the exercise? And if it did find that European solidarity was actually quite extensive, how could this have been better communicated, the ways that European countries did work together during the crisis? Please.
Thank you, Paul, for the opportunity to kind of present the Solidarity Tracker once again to a broader public. I'm still very proud that we did it. And yeah, I still believe in our tool. So this is a great opportunity for me. So when Corona has hit us, sitting where I sit, kind of Berlin, the think tank world, it seemed that the reports about European member states kind of going nationalistic ways, opting for kind of closing borders without consultation. Then from a German perspective, kind of the issue, the export ban on medical goods really framed the debate. Also because I was not in the machinery like my two previous speakers, I was an outsider and watching our media and listening to the news, reading the newspaper, that was kind of the predominant narrative. And you find that also, or we find that in another project that we do at ECFR, which is called the Unlock project, where we do public polling. And we did one huge public poll right before the recovery fund, and the numbers or the results were devastating. So the key finding was basically the EU was irrelevant and did not deliver. So, and that was very much, I think, yeah, common sense. Josep Borrell was talking about the battle of narratives back then, because it seemed that the Chinese did so much better. So, and because in our think tank, we had one colleague of mine who actually worked on China, and he said, well, this is so frustrating because looking at the data, kind of what the Chinese do and what the Europeans do, this is just not well-founded. This is going in the totally wrong direction. And he basically came up with the suggestion to have a closer look at what member states actually do, and to build a tool, a tracker tool, in order to get some hard data and to get a better and well-funded impression of European solidarity. And then we went back to we cooperate closely with Stiftung Mercator, and they were actually also super quick and helpful, because they allowed us to do this within an existing project and to use money. And so within a couple of weeks, we came up with this tool, and it's based on the work of our 27 country researchers all over Europe. In every member state, we have one kind of ECFR hub, a person who works on a consultancy basis for us. And we tasked them to look at how solidarity was talked about in the member states that they were working in, and what kind of the government actually did. And we also looked at the EU level, but we did that ourselves in the Berlin office. So we draw basically on publicly available sources. We collected those data through our national researchers and the Rethink team, and we created an interactive data visualization tool that presents instances of pan-European solidarity from the member states, but also from the EU institutions. And it actually illustrates how solidarity between the member states has been communicated, debated, and also put into action. So we show also what member states understand by the term solidarity, because that was different and changed over the course of the crisis. First, it was very much about medical equipment. Later, it was very much about the economy. So we decided to track several kinds of solidarity, and the idea was really to build it. I mean, not precisely as a counter narrative, but because we did not invent kind of the data, but we thought that we wanted to have a fact-based approach. And what we actually found was that that despite the divisions and despite the unilateral travel restrictions and the export bans, Europeans remain deeply interconnected, and there was a lot of interaction. Every member state, even the smallest one, was actually showing some sort of solidarity towards kind of fellow Europeans. So what to us mattered was that we had something that was based on actual data, that was that you could also check, that was easily accessible to everybody, that was very transparent. That was easy to navigate. So everybody here or out there in the audience can go to our website and kind of Google ECFR Solidarity Tracker and then work with the tool. So you can really see every single instant of solidarity. And we wanted to be very transparent in the way how we present it, and we wanted to be very easy to understand and very visual. And that actually did, I think, all the trick, because when we launched it, we had, I mean, maybe not very modest, but I would say we had kind of some success on Twitter, because we created this network of solidarity. It was just a map with a web of connections. And it was just one image, and it was very telling, and it got a lot of retweets. People jumped on it immediately, also because it was in this dark period when we had all these negative trends. It was just kind of, I think everybody was just happy to have something different and something counterintuitive. I think, and that's the last point, I think we included also the personal level, coming back to the emotions. So we wanted to include civil society and not only the state level. That was, of course, very difficult, and we don't claim that this is a very kind of that this covers every aspect of solidarity. But we did look for instances of civil society solidarity, and we found these beautiful little stories, and the media was very ready to pick them up. They were kind of very similar to the ones that Pierre has mentioned. I don't know, some startup entrepreneur in the field of 3D printing who came up with kind of a protection mask that could be printed, or some Dutch who sent some fish to I think it was some city in Austrian-Westphalia, where they kind of shipped some fish to say thank you to the hospital staff, and different little beautiful stories that the media loved, and where kind of, yeah, it was easier for them then to pick the story up and to report about it. So, yeah.
You need some positive messages as well, right?
Yes.
Sometimes the negative messages are out there because they're more attractive, or just because they're more widespread, right? And one of the negative messages that we heard quite a lot about at the time, and I've raised this because you mentioned China, was this time when it felt like the EU was falling behind in the kind of coronavirus diplomacy field on an international level, with Russia and China winning lots of headlines for providing medical equipment, both in the EU to Italy and in its neighborhood in Serbia, for example. So do you think this was a missed opportunity? Did the EU slip up there? Because we know that the EU was providing support to Italy and to Serbia, but yet it was other powers that managed to win the headlines with these kind of PR stunts. What can the EU do to fight back against that kind of thing? I think we should work, again, very fact-based, and that is coming again back to the solidarity tracker, what we then also decided to do, because at a later stage, after we got the thing up and running, we decided to include data on China. And to look at the donations that China made to the EU. We did not look at Serbia, but we did look at European member states. And we found out that kind of the vast number of the so-called donations were in reality purchases, or kind of somewhere in the gray zone. So if you compare the data kind of directly, you see that the EU was just doing so much more in comparison to China. And also later, I think initially China was very successful, but coming back to other data that we collected,
the unlock poll, but also we did a survey amongst head of state and government and representatives from ministries all over Europe, and we saw that in most member states this narrative did not really prevail, with the exception maybe of Italy, where the impression or the perception of China is still more positive than in other EU member states. Largely, it failed because I think after a while people realized that the quality of the stuff that they got was not very good, or that I think also the media again discovered that sometimes member states paid huge amounts of money for masks and those stuff. So I think I'm still a big believer in facts. And not alternative facts, but facts as facts. So I think we should, and I think that's what we did, but we should call the bluff and try to debunk the myth and to really, I mean, not to invent stuff, but just to show things as they are. And I think in this crisis, we really had the upper hand. And so it's enough to show and to emphasize what we did.
Thanks very much, Jana. I think that's the perfect bridge to our last speaker. So James Kanter, who is the co-producer of the EU Scream podcast, which won the Good Lobbies Media of the Year award in 2019, talking of telling things as they are and also about scrutiny and accountability. I think having a journalistic point of view in this discussion would be helpful at this point. So James, I'd like to ask you, what has your experience been of how the EU institutions in particular, but maybe also the member states and other actors, have involved the media during the crisis? I mean, we heard from Pia that there needed to be an adaptation to the virtual press conferences and so on. But what have the consequences been for journalists' ability to scrutinize and hold decision makers accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a key question. And actually, first of all, I want to pay tribute to the reporters who work in dangerous places, but now have, of course, the additional health risks that come with working in a COVID-19 environment. I think we should really bear those people in mind. And I also want to start out by highlighting how, especially when it comes to member states, the media and communications during this crisis, there's been a really widespread and deep concern, and it's not really going away, that some of the emergency measures introduced by some governments have been a pretext for eroding freedom of speech in the press. And, you know, in this context, let's not forget that Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, had this coronavirus law passed with prison sentences for spreading false information. And I'd also recall that it was Slovenia's leadership that used the coronavirus to smear investigative journalists. And press freedom organizations like Reporters Without Borders have rightly seen these kinds of actions as opportunistic and extremely concerning. And, you know, when it comes to Hungary, there's of course been a long line of examples of the government cracking down. And really the question now for the EU is whether the Orban government's moves to curb freedom of expression, free and independent media, should be followed by the suspension of Hungary's access to certain EU funds. So, you know, one hopes to see some really concrete debate about that. It's going forward, especially when it comes to the budget negotiations. So, yeah, I mean, you also asked, Paul, about this, the communications in Brussels, and you know, essentially a lot of journalists here in the EU bubble, they do have a work from home situation, and that's not really great for journalism. It's harder to keep in touch with sources, and if someone isn't picking up the phone, you can't try and get them at their offices anymore. The buildings, by and large, are shut, and all of that is damaging in terms of holding the powerful to account. Also, journalists aren't sharing info as easily as they used to do with other journalists because they just don't meet as frequently. And it's often one's colleagues who are the best guides to what's happening and to what's really relevant. specifically, the European Parliament press room is open, but the Commission and the Council press rooms are still shut. And let me just go a little bit deeper into that. I mean, as for the Commission, yes, it has done a really good job with its video service, and we can ask questions remotely at the midday briefing. The tech is really great, and Eric Mamer and Dana Spinant, they handle the glitches with kind of epic patience and grace. So hats off to them. Now, though, the thinking among some folks is that because the Commission press room has space for like 300 journalists, it should be able to accommodate somehow around 50 or 60 of them under social distancing protocols. And anyways, that's the normal number that usually shows up. So let's see if that happens. As for the Council, as for the European Council, that's in some ways even more serious and more complicated. A lot of journalists during that epic 4-day summit for the budget summit in July, they were pretty frustrated working from home. And that's not least because the leaks that were driving the news, and to some degree it's the leaks that drive the negotiations, they seem to be going to far fewer outlets. And again, you have sort of accountability problems there. But here it's tricky because letting journalists physically into the council for summits is kind of impossible on a first come, first served basis, because in those cases, we aren't talking about 50 or 60 journalists from the Brussels bubble. We're talking about who can social distance. We're talking about potentially thousands, or at least 1,000 coming in from the member states. I'm really interested in some of the verdicts that will be passed on how the EU dealt with this pandemic, but I don't know if I should keep talking about that or whether you want to do a follow-up question at this point.
Well, in a moment, I would like to turn to the audience and ask for questions from the audience, because I would like to hear their concerns and interests as well. And I'll take this opportunity to say that people should start thinking about questions. You can raise your hand using the button which is under the participants or the chat boxes, but you can also type something into the chat if you have a question there. I see there have already been a couple of questions asked in the Q&A box, which I will get to in a minute. But first, I do have one last question, which I would like to just round things off with. So James, let's imagine the year is 2030. We are looking back on the EU's response to the 2020 crisis in historical perspective. How do you think things will be judged? And in particular, what will be the main narratives that survive over not just the next 6 months, but the next 10 years? What sort of impact will this whole experience have on the public's long-term perception of the EU and its ability to cope with crisis?
Yeah, so I think the verdict is going to be mixed and messy, as it always is with the EU. And yes, there was complacency and confusion and a lack of coordination in the early months of 2020 as the pandemic spread. But, you know, there were also some stellar efforts by Brussels. Breton's cabinet, Thierry Breton's cabinet, tried hard to get PPE, and there's been joint purchasing and so on. As for the emotional communications that Pia talked about, yes, I mean, there were efforts here that were noteworthy. I particularly liked Eric Mamer's use of poetry on the podium at the midday. It showed a sensitivity, I think, to the depth of the crisis. One potential legacy from COVID: did supply chains get shortened? Was there more self-sufficiency as a result? I mean, that could turn out to be a really big narrative about the retreat from globalization and Europe's place in the world. Another thing that's a really big takeaway for me is, you know, the EU isn't really tasked with healthcare, at least not yet. And, you know, just an example, Malta is still free to jeopardize the health of Europeans by being allowed to continue banning abortions. It's perfectly legal for Malta to do that. There is no real health mandate at the Brussels level. Now, it seems to me that the stories that will really stick, if we're talking about 2030, are really more about the varied national responses. And those varied national responses being less of an indictment of the European project per se, but more as a sort of series of public health studies showing us that as a people in some of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world, we were fumbling for a response to a pandemic, something that really could become a little bit of a new normal. But there, in my view, there is a big but here about the legacy for the EU, and it's this. It was a way that in those early spring weeks, Italy was left in the lurch by its neighbors with truly horrifying levels of mortality. And that does seem to have turned an already Eurosceptic population even more Eurosceptic. And, you know, if at some point Italy elects a government that has an agenda to leave the Euro or even the EU, then I do think that the COVID-19 pandemic might be seen as one of the proximate causes. And remember, Ursula von der Leyen had to apologize twice to Italy. And I think the jury is still out on whether that represented a sort of better late than never for Italians, or a little bit ominously, a kind of too little too late.
Sounds like a mixed record, as you were saying. On the one hand, maybe Europe finding its heart, not a response to a crisis that really went into the emotional level and gave the impression of a Europe which is not just technocracy, not just about economics, but that covers everything relating to citizens' concerns and healthcare and so on. But on the other hand, as you were saying, potentially challenging circumstances to come, including politically. And this crisis has certainly, and the response to it has certainly played something of a role there. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panel and now to turn to the audience for any audience questions. To begin with, we already have a couple of questions that are particularly for Pia, but maybe some of the other speakers might want to come in on response to some of them as well. So from Klaus Klipp, we have two questions. The first of which is that in the very early stages, so in January and February, before the shutdowns really came in, the member states were kind of rejecting the EU Commission's attempt to come up with a coordinated approach. The member states were rejecting this until it was too late. And then after that, governments and media kind of blamed the EU. Klaus Klipp asks, I've not seen anything about this from the Commission. Is there a reason for not having a response to the member state blame game, so to speak? I would maybe pose that question to the whole panel in the terms of calling out the member states when they're trying to blame the EU. Is this, how do we effectively do something like that? And maybe touching on that subject, the Recovery Fund brought out this division between North and South again, with the messaging of the frugal North versus the crisis-stricken South. Why do you think this is such an attractive message, and what can we do to counter it? And one other question, which is about reaching out beyond the usual suspects and reaching people who aren't already the friends of the EU. What can we do about that? Pia, I would ask you to start your brief response to these very large questions.
They are very large and they are very fundamental, and I think a lot of the great interventions from the other speakers have pinpointed many of the aspects that this question also touches upon. It is true, and I mentioned it, that it took more than it should have to indeed make member states come together and realize that the coordination to respond to this unprecedented health crisis was absolutely indispensable. And the person who is asking the question is absolutely right. Yes, we were there from the very early weeks of the year, pinpointing the threats and the needs, some of them at least. And yet it took quite a while to get audible, and also, but again, it is maybe not so hard to understand either why member states facing this unprecedented health crisis reacted in a kind of instinctive way, dealing with the short-term immediate impacts, and of course struggling in some cases to indeed ensure that the capacity to deal with it existed right there, right now on the ground. Calling out member states struggling, I don't think from our perspective would have brought them faster together, although there is absolutely no doubt, and I think it was referred to also, was it in James' intervention, where indeed our president has apologized more than once for this incapacity of the EU at the very first moment to respond forcefully in a joint way. I referred to this speech in the European Parliament of President von der Leyen, where I think she used a lot of emotion. It was one of those apologies, but it was also one of those moments where, and I think we all admitted this, we all had to admit this, every member state had to admit it, that no member state was ready for this crisis. We were not prepared as we should have been. It's true, we should have been better prepared, but we were not. And no one was ready. And as the president said, that too many were not there on time when Italy needed a helping hand at the very beginning, right? So I think, you know, there's a lot of grief over this, and one, of course, that can never overcome for the individual families who have lost people to COVID. But Europe did come together and learned a very painful lesson about what happens if we don't work together. In addition to then also the very good efforts that, and James highlighted some of them, indeed involving protective equipment, stockpiling, getting the solidarity out when member states then quite quickly actually did come together, and we overcame this together. But you know, the losses were immense. And bigger than they could have been, undoubtedly. And then now towards this unprecedented solidarity effort, which has in the meantime overtaken those initial reluctances to see the bigger picture and the common interest. So I think, yes, we have experienced both, and we are learning the lessons. And we are learning the lessons, as I was also saying when I started speaking, because this is the most important thing, in addition to, of course, providing the means for Europe, or at least helping Europe to recover, learning the lessons about, you know, how we can improve our preparedness for future pandemics or other threats that surely, you know, the future holds, also in addition to hopefully many new opportunities, thanks to the instruments that we now have. So this is what I would respond. No one was ready, but we learned the lesson fast, and I don't think the same mistakes will be made again.
Thank you, Pia. So we are running a little bit over time, and I think that is perhaps the perfect moment to end on. But I do want to very quickly just check to see if any of the other speakers would like to come in to answer these questions as well. Yes, Jana, please. I know you have to leave before long. So.
Yes, thank you. I want to come back to the frugal question and the North-South divide and how we better bridge this. And what I thought throughout the whole debate about solidarity is that we always talk about solidarity in crisis, and we always frame it through one particular lens. So now it was all about masks and then the recovery fund, but in the migration crisis, it was about distributing migrants, the kind of readiness of member states to take migrants in. When then there was a security solidarity crisis after 2015, when François Hollande invoked Article 42.7, then we talked a lot about solidarity in security and defense vis-a-vis the French. And in the Eurozone crisis, so it's always, always framed in a very narrow way according to the crisis that just is happening. And I think what we would need is to broaden the debate and also to make some crossovers. So, for example, a country, I don't know, might be affected in one crisis or might need European solidarity on one particular crisis, and in another crisis, it is not the recipient but the donor of solidarity. So I think we should maybe think of it more as a big kind of an insurance where everybody pays in, and in times of need you get something out of it, but everybody gets something out of it. It's not kind of that the frugals always pay and the South always gets, because in the migration crisis, this has been very much the South shouldering the burden for many, many years. And so in the security field, it's very much all the Central and Eastern member states. I mean, they do it through NATO, but also within the EU that want solidarity or that they want the other member states to recognize and realize what their problems are, and they want to have them with them. So I think, to me, this is also the key, that we should move on from framing solidarity only kind of from one particular crisis to the other, and then in very narrow terms, but to think of it more, as something that leaves you exposed, or that keeps you insured in any occasion. And
solidarity goes in many directions. Right?
Yes, that was just something I wanted to say.
Lovely. Well, let me round off by saying once again thank you to all of our panelists. I'm very glad that we managed to cover so much ground, even if we did go over time a little bit. Thank you to Pia. Thank you to the rest of the panel. This conversation will, of course, continue for much longer, and we look forward to learning more about how the communication for the recovery plan continues over the coming months. And hopefully we're looking forward to not just a resolution of the crisis, but a healthy recovery as well. So thank you also to our attendees, and I wish you a nice rest of the day.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.